Hello and welcome to The Slowdown. Activism at its best is one of the most generous things a person can do. You give your time, your nervous system, and sometimes your name and safety to a cause bigger than you. But what happens when the work that once gave your life meaning begins to deplete it? When becoming a public figure means becoming a target, facing threats, scrutiny, and the pressure to remain the same version of yourself forever. Today, I'm speaking with Gina Martin, a multi-award-winning gender equality advocate, writer, and facilitator, who, at the age of 25, launched the campaign that led to the Voyeurism Offences Act in 2019, making upskirting a criminal offence in England and Wales after it happened to her at a London music festival. She carried out an 18-month campaign while working full-time and enduring hundreds of online threats. Since then, Gina has written 3 books and continues her work as an activist both on the ground and at scale, from working in schools on prevention of gender-based violence to writing, speaking, and media work with platforms including The Telegraph, Stylist, Grazia, and the World Economic Forum. Her work has been recognised by Time's 100 Next list and the Evening Standard's 1,000 Most Influential Londoners. But this conversation isn't only about what she's built. It's about what it takes and what it costs to do this work in public. We talk about activism, visibility, burnout, social media, and what happens when your views evolve but the public still expects you to be one-dimensional. Recorded here at Brazen Studios and sponsored by Greek swim and resort wear brand Kione, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Gina Martin. Hi, Gina. Welcome to The Slowdown. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
I love to start this show with some context. So I would love to know where you were raised, by whom, and what your earliest idea of success was.
I was raised by my mum and dad, my parents. Very blessed to be raised by them. They're very funny, creative, affectionate, loving people. And I was raised just outside of Liverpool. My family are Liverpudlian, and I come from a long line of Scousers. And I think I had an interesting idea of, or not interesting, but maybe a creative idea of success growing up because I come from a really creative family. So my dad's a session musician, and my mum was in interior design, interior architecture, and also was an artist for a while. And yeah, I remember just like witnessing my parents work and like hustle and do it for a creative endeavor and thinking like to have a career like that was what success was, like to do something that you really genuinely enjoyed.
It sounds like those are the sort of parents that would also encourage your tenacity and your ideas.
Yeah, they were. I remember being really young. I'm going to say around like 6 or 7. And we had these big, beautiful trees opposite our house, and the council was going to cut them down. I remember just being like deeply devastated by the idea. And me and my sister were like in the newspaper, like hugging these trees, like, no. And there's like a photo shoot. Like, and I remember my parents being like, yes, like, or like send letters and like, you know, fight for things. And so they were just really supportive of whatever we were passionate about, which is, you know, a really healthy thing. I'm really lucky to have that.
I was wondering if sort of feeling injustices was something that you felt more strongly than other kids from a younger age. I
don't think I had a keen awareness of injustice as a young person. I think in terms of the actual reality of what injustice is, I grew up in an incredibly white village in a very sheltered environment. I had a sense of not fitting in, like, you know, so many people have for so many varied reasons. And I was bullied quite badly in school and physically bullied. And I felt, I just remember like really struggling to feel like I wasn't weird or annoying or, I just felt constantly uncomfortable about being kind of seen in school. And I've kind of later found out that was because I'm neurodivergent and I was really struggling to kind of like engage in school in some ways that were like normal. Like I used to do things that teachers would like laugh about and then other kids would laugh about them. And then that kind of led to like bullying, and there was different things there that I really struggled with. But so I kind of knew what it felt like to not feel a sense of belonging, which we know is like a core psychological need. Not feeling like that was really hard. And it went on for years and years, and it was physical. And I felt very excluded at times. And so I think there was maybe that sense that was very clear to me as a young person, and probably followed me and definitely has followed me into my, and did follow me into my young adulthood. And I remember really reaching out to and wanting to be there for other kids who were experiencing that in different ways, like feeling really strongly that I knew what that felt like.
How did you find living in London as opposed to where you grew up?
Oh my gosh. Well, I went from a tiny village to Leeds for uni, and I loved Leeds. Like Leeds is still one of my favorite cities. And then once I graduated, I just remember getting the megabus constantly for like £5. It took hours and hours from Leeds to London with my friend who was also wanted to be in the industry and advertising. And we would just find places to stay. And eventually this guy who owned a pub in North London offered that we could stay in the storeroom of his pub. And he had this like, it was, he's like now like one of my dads. Like he's the best. But I remember at the time being like, we're going to get killed. Like this is weird. And he offered us this room in the storeroom of his pub. You know, he had like a big marketing 4-foot tall Red Bull can in there. And like, it was a single bed. And me and Jen were like, we'll take it. And we ended up staying for 2 weeks while we were interning. And then he just offered for us to stay as long as we want. And he's still today, this is, 13 years later, 14 years later, he's such a wonderful person. But at the time I was like, what are you doing? Like, why did you do that? Are you okay? And I remember finding London really like exciting, but also like fitting, because I grew up in a village, but because of my dad's job, I was really lucky to travel because he'd be playing in Paris or whatever. And we'd sometimes be flown out because we were his family. And so we were like a working class family, but we had access to these experiences that weren't working class at all. And so I had access to different cities, and my family, originally from Liverpool and stuff. So I always felt a pull to a city. And once I got to London, I was like, okay, there's so much opportunity here. There's so much opportunity to create a creative life.
I want to obviously go into what then happened in your early 20s, but I'm also conscious that it defined such a big part of your 20s. And so I guess before I ask about it, I was just wondering how, looking back, that makes you feel in terms of how you got to experience like London in your 20s.
That's a really thoughtful question. I have, before that particular assault that we're alluding to, which is me being upskirted at 25, 26, I was just turning 26. I have the before that in my mind, which is this kind of experience of being really excited about being in the industry, trying to get a job in advertising, having all of those firsts that you get in a city where you feel like you're really part of something and you're exploring and you're making, meeting people you'd never have be exposed to at home, and you're loving every second of it. And there's probably a lot of silly things in that and a lot of kind of risk involved in that and a lot of learning. And then I actually went to live in Greece for a year and a half, halfway through that. And then when I came back from Greece, literally 2 months later, the upskirting happened. And then I have a very, very patchy memory of the 2 years after that. Like there's not much I could tell you apart from the campaigning. I can't really remember my life outside of campaigning during that period, but it was a significantly traumatic period. And so there's a kind of before time and an after time.
I know it's hard to like go back there, and you've probably spent a lot of time trying to forget a lot of it, but at the same time having to go through the courts, you had to probably recall so many details of it as well. But if you will, I wanted to just go back to Hyde Park British Summertime Festival 2017. The Killers are playing. You've got your sister beside you. I guess I'm curious about like what you were feeling in that moment, and obviously like what actually happened to you.
I remember that entire experience minute for minute, second for second. I remember that very, very clearly. And And I'm going to try and tell you about it not in the way that I usually talk about it, because I know that there's like room for nuance here and in this discussion. And usually I kind of say the same thing every time, because I've probably told the story like 2,000 times at this point. So I'm going to try and actually be present while I tell it. I remember being really excited to be with my sister again, because I'd been abroad. And it was like the reunion moment. It was like this band that we loved as teenagers when we were much younger. And we were able to come together and actually see them for the first time. So I was just in joy. Like, I was so excited to be there with her. And as we were waiting for the Killers to come on stage, it just got very apparent that there was a group of guys near us that were like trying to engage in some way. And I'm incredibly extroverted. So I'll talk to anyone. Like in my job, I have created a career for myself where I spend most of my time with strangers. Because I love interacting with people. But as soon as I get this sense that particularly men are trying to encroach on or engage with something that I'm doing in a way that is entitled or in a way that is inappropriate, I can smell that a mile off, and I shut that shit down very quickly. And that started to happen. The guy started making comments. He made a sexual comment, and I immediately kind of mocked him. And then me and Stevie kind of turned away from them, created some space, and kind of tried to watch the show and ignore them. And just from that one interaction where he'd made that sexual comment and I'd kind of mocked him back or like said something quite cutting to him, I felt one of the guys up against my back, and then there was two of them standing in front of me, and kind of turned around because I felt someone up against my back, and he was just standing there. It's like nothing weird. And then the two guys in front of me started laughing, and I could just tell that they were laughing at me. I could tell that something had happened. So I kind of looked round to the front of one of the guys, and he was on his phone, and he had a photo of my crotch and my knickers and like a really close-up photo of under my clothes on his phone. I'd had like a couple of drinks, so I was quite impulsive, and I grabbed the phone and I started screaming. I was like, "Why are you taking pictures of my vagina?" And he was like, I'm not. And then a girl next to me who I'd just been talking to, me and Stevie had been talking to, who was really lovely, she'd been like, pass me the phone. So I slipped her the phone, and the guy like got hold of my shoulders and was like shaking me. He was this huge guy, and he was like shaking me, and I like slapped him really hard, and then looked at these two guys to my left who were really young. They must have been like 19 or something, but we were in a crowd of 60,000 people, so I couldn't like move or get out. And I looked at them and I was like, help me. And because he was like holding onto my shoulders, and these two guys just like moved three people out of the way and just went, run. And the girl passed me the phone, and I ran to the police because I'd seen where the exits were. I ran to the police, and he chased me, the guy that had hold of me, and I got to the police, and they kind of surrounded me, and he was jumping over the police. He was absolutely like infuriated. And I said he's been taking pictures of me, and I gave him the phone. And then two police officers came, a female police officer and a male police officer, and I was really relieved that it was a female police officer. At the time, I thought that a female police officer meant a particular type of response. And they both said, okay, we've seen the picture. It shows more than you'd want it to show, but there's not much we can do because you're wearing knickers. Yeah. And I was like crying and super confused because all I'd ever been told was wear more clothes in order to control men's behavior. And he said, well, it's not a graphic image. And so because it's not a graphic image, I don't know if there's much we can do. Do you want to make a statement? And obviously I said no, because he just said there wasn't much they could do. And they went, okay, we're really sorry, we'll be in touch. And then they kind of left. And I was just like left at this festival with the guys that were there and had no idea what just happened. And I went home and contacted a student lawyer friend of mine and said, do I have like any like remit here to like prosecute? Because this feels wild. And we found out that upskirting wasn't a sexual offence in England and Wales, but it had been in Scotland for a decade. And that's kind of where the beginning of campaigning started for me. This wasn't my first experience of sexual violence or of assault. It was the experience that broke the camel's back, where I was so frustrated with the response. I'd put a picture on social media of the guys I'd happened to get when I'd taken a selfie with my sister that day. The next day I put that on Facebook, and it went kind of a tiny bit viral for the time, like 8,000 likes or something. And Facebook took it down and cited harassment on my part for putting the picture up. So every single safety net was not doing its job, and I just got infuriated, and that's where it started. Yeah.
You have a very good way of explaining like why you think people do these things, because it's not the most like salacious of images. It's not like going to make him money on Pornhub, but it's like why in that moment where they clearly felt that they had lost some kind of upper hand with you.
It's about control and power. The idea that specifically upskirting or any type of image-based abuse is about sexual gratification isn't necessarily true. When we changed the law, we made sure to include like distress or alarm or humiliation, because this is a tactic that patriarchal and misogynistic men use when they feel like they've lost a sense of dominance or a sense of power over the woman in front of them. We see this with men who hit on women and the woman says no, and the immediate response is like, yeah, well, you're not that hot anyway. Like, there's a punishment that comes when women reject men because the social script says that they should have dominance and that they should be able to engage with women in a way that is objectifying, that makes them feel more masculine. And when we say no to that, there are a lot of men that get incredibly uncomfortable. And when you're uncomfortable and you have big feelings, revenge becomes something that is an option. And that's kind of what happened to me. When you transgress someone's autonomy and someone's rights, you feel like you gain something. You feel powerful, and that's what he felt in that moment. There could never have been consent because I was standing in a festival watching a show. There was not one moment or part of me that was interested or had even considered showing a man I don't know my crotch or my genitals.
And in these moments where you're extremely violated, a lot of people would kind of go into themselves, be embarrassed by the whole thing. But you chose to make a petition, spend 18 months campaigning this and getting this passed into a law. Like, why, I suppose, where did you find that in you? Was that the girl that hugged the tree again, or was that some sort of new lease of energy that you felt like, I need to do this?
There's a Venn diagram that would probably be able to articulate why I decided to go that hard on it and publicly, and why I was relatively comfortable to do that. I would say the parts of the Venn diagram would be, yes, being raised in a family where my voice and the things I cared about and my autonomy were consistently developed through my parents. There's a part of that Venn diagram which is that there were many times previous to that where I had absorbed men's behavior and felt uncomfortable with it and thought I couldn't do anything about it. I think it's sometimes easy for us to frame people who do these kinds of things that have a certain amount of courage to their actions as that's just who they are. It's not. Like, I was also terrified the whole time. But there had been enough moments where I'd absorbed men's behavior. I'd had so many small and large experiences that I'd lay in bed thinking about, and that had made me feel unsafe and scared. And it just so happened that in this environment at this time, I was so angry and so incensed by what had happened. Like, on the day I was with my sister, I was in a crowd of people. I actually think partly the environment allowed me to say something because I was with her and my sister is my backbone. And also all of these people were around us. And so once I had the phone, I knew I could prove to people that this had happened.
Because so much of female sexual harassment is like, are you believed?
Yes, it's it's the truth versus the perpetrator's story. And in this case, it wasn't. There was lots of people around us who saw it happen or saw the evidence of it on the phone. And then having particularly people around me, like my partner was instrumental in me deciding to try and change the law. He was the one that was like, I was like, okay, it's my case, which I don't really have a case because it's not a sexual offense, but I can maybe try and prosecute under this 100-year-old common law that doesn't even recognize as a victim, or I could try and change something to do with the legislation. And I thought that was like the wildest idea, and it was so unrealistic. And he was really like, no, you should do that. Like, why can't you do that? You should definitely do that. And so was my sister, and so was my family, and so my friends. And I really think the people that I have around me really emboldened me to do it when I thought maybe that was a stupid idea. Yeah.
And in those 18 months of campaigning and then successfully having that law passed, what was like the hardest part?
I don't think there was a part of that process that wasn't challenging. I would really struggle to pinpoint a particular part of that was the most challenging, because I honestly, like, emotionally, I actually can't even like really pull it apart. The process of consistently campaigning because I did it every single day, and I was working a full-time job for like 24 grand a year, and so just the schedule of that was exhausting. The emotional weight of feeling the responsibility to pass it, because I was constantly getting stories from, everyone from an 11-year-old girl who was at school who was upskirted by a student in her class to a 90-year-old woman that it happened to, from female teachers whose male students had done it to her. Like the collective amount of stories, thousands of them, I felt like a real responsibility to finish it. Which was really challenging, because that can create like inertia. You can be like, I can't, because I was absolutely terrified that I wouldn't be able to do it. And then alongside just learning about British politics and being in Parliament and being at Portcullis House all the time and having all these meetings and having to play a very strategic game with my lawyer that was genuinely like, we were playing politics with the politicians because we had to, because you can't just ask politicians to do something. That's not how it works. A lot of British politics is around optics, and it's actually incredibly depressing. So like learning all that on the job, and then I was dealing with like rape and death threats the entire time. I was also learning so much about myself politically, and like I was having like kind of a political awakening at the time, and I was finding it really hard to let people in my life, because what I was experiencing was so unique and I felt so alone in it. So there was quite a separation between like me and my people. Apart from my partner and my immediate family, I kind of was not really available for a lot of it, and I didn't have a whole lot of support because I didn't let people in on it. It was really, as I say, I don't have memories of those 2 years really, and that's because there was lots of trauma that came along with it. But it was it was a baptism of fire for sure, and I learned a lot about myself.
And when the Voyeurism Act was passed in 2019, did you feel a sense of catharsis or a sense of like, I've done it for all these other people? Or was there now a sense of like, what do I do now? What was the feeling like when it was passed and just after?
I sat in the gallery and watched them pass it with my family and friends. And I had an idea of what I thought that moment would be like, a hypothetical idea. And I felt literally nothing. Like I sat in the gallery and I remember them passing it and my family being like, yay. And I literally was like, okay, I don't know why. I think that's probably a protective mechanism of some kind. And then I left and we went to the pub and we sat and drank for ages. Dranked? Wow. We sat and drank for ages in the pub, me, my lawyer, my family, and just talked about it all. And after a couple of drinks, like a very intense sensation of like absolute relief, but not like joyous relief, like exhausted relief. I was just crying, couldn't stop crying. And I was like, I'm so glad it's over. I'm so glad it's over. Like I was just so desperate for it to be over by that point. I've never really felt like an embodied sense of pride about it. Like, because ultimately I didn't really want to do it. I think that's what it comes down to, is that like, you're proud of things that really fulfill you. But I never wanted to fight the government on changing the law. I just felt like I had to, because I was so angry and so broken by my experiences. So I think when it finished, I was just like relieved and like, thank God that's over, you know?
But then you obviously stayed in activism. And was there a process of you figuring out, like, clearly I'm good at this and I want to help people, but I need to actually take a step back almost from this experience and figure out, how am I best used to actually help, and what do I care about?
It was about a year afterwards where I was being offered all these like wild opportunities, and I wrote a book, and there was all this commercial, there was like awards, and like I was just like invited to like TV shows and like all, you know, huge events, and like it was just like the flavor of the month type person at the time. And I remember going to loads of those things and be like, this is really fun. And then after a little while being like, this isn't like why I do any of the work I do. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, I can't replicate what I've just done again. I'm not going to be changing laws my whole life. That's not a job. That's something I felt I had to do at the time. And so I remember pausing and thinking about the people who I'd spoken to, who I'd respected, and how they'd kind of reflected on what I'd done and what I could do. And there was lots of recommendation to stand as an MP, interestingly, and go into politics in some way. Felt much more connected to the idea of being in community and doing grassroots work, because that's kind of, I only started that campaign for people. I didn't do it to gain access to the halls of power. That wasn't why I was doing it. So kind of took a little bit of a pause and worked for Naomi Nicholas Williams pro bono for a little while on a campaign she was running to change global Instagram policy, because it was discriminating against plus-size Black women's bodies. It was censoring them, and we won that, which was great. We changed that global Instagram policy. So I remember doing a couple of things and thinking like, yeah, this is what I want to do. But I didn't know what that looked like, and I didn't know how you made money from it. Ultimately, I think it took me a long time to figure out how to actually have a career that is about impacting and making change in terms of gendered violence. I'm glad I'm here now, but it took a little while.
I saw a post that you did that I think epitomizes some of your complex feelings about what you achieved 7 years ago and kind of the journey that you've been on since. And the ways that maybe you've not necessarily changed your mind, but these emotions of, I did this thing 7 years ago as a survival, as a reaction to something that happened to me. But does that necessarily mean that I now have to be put in the box of somebody who is basically pro-punishment, right?
I'm not.
That's kind of what you then get known for in activism. It's worth really remembering that you were like 25 when this all happened to you, and most people don't know much about systems change and how education works. And so at what point did you actually start to kind of widen your aperture and think about systems change and education? And then once you did figure that out and you started to do the facilitation work that you do in schools with young people, because that's really where it starts. Like, if we were to go back to that incident with you, what would have happened if those boys had had a better education, you know, didn't have those like locker room conversations that we talk about? And when you started to do all of that, how did you then feel about this law that you had passed that is effectively a punitive law that punishes people in our very, you know, not great criminal justice system, right? But I'm interested in that personal journey that you took of like learning more, what it is that you learn, and then how you felt, the difficulty you felt to then reflect that to this audience of hundreds of thousands of people that follow you, that expect you to be kind of one voice on one thing, when you're actually a human that is multifaceted and evolving and changing.
I started to have complex feelings and a complex relationship to my work not long after I finished it. So I would say around 2020, a couple of like comrades and peers who work in kind of different areas of justice work invited me to a conversation where they asked questions about my relationship to the police and to the government. And, you know, got to remember at the time, I had to work with all political parties in Britain, but it was a Conservative government under Theresa May that I was working with primarily to force them to change the law. And I say working with because although you have a tense relationship, you become a thorn in their side. So from the inside, they're not liking me. We don't have a good relationship, but the relationship has to be productive enough that we can work together to change the law. But from the outside, I also think it looked much more unified than it was. And I think that I absolutely hated working with them. And I've actually only 2 days ago just had the first interaction with the police 2 days ago with a police case I currently have that was actually compassionate and thoughtful and positive. First time in 14 years of different things with the police. So I really struggled with the institutions that I was working with, and a couple of peers of mine pulled me aside and said, okay, I know that you feel like that, but you wouldn't know from the outside. Like, you wouldn't, watching you wouldn't know that. And your work is carceral, and carceral feminism is, a type of feminism that says that by increasing powers of the police and putting people in jail, we solve the problem of violence. And that's just categorically not true. We don't solve violence by putting people into inherently violent systems. The men that go into these, into our privatized prison system in the UK, which is the most privatized in Europe, are not more likely to come out less violent, less harmful, and less likely to harm themselves or other people. So this isn't prevention work. And we had conversations about that. And those conversations forced me to look at my work and say, where do I really stand on criminalization and carceral feminism versus like justice and prevention? And how do I feel about it? And it was really uncomfortable. I spent like seven or 8 months. This was like during COVID. There was like that forced pause. And like a lot of that forced pause for me was me kind of like wrestling with that question, doing a lot of reading, doing a lot of journaling, going to therapy a lot, and wrestling with the idea that I'd done that, and maybe I was a bit of a poster, and I think I was like a poster child for carceral feminism at the time, but my politics were moving way past that. And I also had to engage with the idea that it's really nuanced, right? Like, the law that I changed that makes upskirting a sexual offence is not mine. It's also something that victims and survivors across the country and across other countries are incredibly thankful for. And that's not an experience that I get to dictate. It just isn't. I also benefit from laws like that. There's a man in prison that stalked me for 7 years. And the moment he was put in prison, I didn't turn on my home alarm system. I have felt more safe since he was in prison than I ever did before. However, he will come out of prison at some point. And I don't know that he's less likely to contact me or harm himself. And so I've benefited from those laws, but my politics and my feminism is rooted more in abolitionist tendencies now, and is rooted more in this idea of prevention, because I don't know how we get out the mess we're in without prevention work. If we're not disrupting harmful patriarchal white supremacist cycles early, and we're not doing the work that helps people to come back to themselves before these systems tell them who they're meant to be, the police arrive after the fact. Criminalization happens after the harm's occurred. Like, we have to be earlier in that process. So I learned a lot from people who are now my North Stars, like Angela Davis and Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and Richie Reseda, and different abolitionists and community leaders across the world whose work I follow. And I had really difficult conversations with myself, and I decided to be public about the fact that my politics have moved on, and that I don't want to be known as someone only who criminalized something, because to me, prevention is a much more exciting and realistic and human endeavor than criminalization is. And that much more fits the kind of person I want to be and the kind of advocate and feminist I want to be.
And give me an example of what prevention work looks like. You go to a school, what kind of age are the students? What kind of conversations are you having?
So prevention of gendered violence specifically, which is what I work in. If you take the drivers of gendered violence, one of which is rigid gendered stereotypes. So the gender binary, and this idea that people have to live and look and be and appear and move and love in a certain way dependent on the construct of gender. So being a man or a woman, and doesn't recognize anyone outside of that. Being able to allow people the space to question those rigid gender expectations and explore what it would mean for them to identify where those expectations aren't so good for them, are restricting them or harming them, and how those expectations shape their behavior and attitude towards other people is prevention work. Because what that looks like in real terms is going into a school and being in a room with year 9s or year 10s or year 11s, like I have been doing for the past 3 years, and having really honest conversations with young teenage boys about what are the expectations placed on you to be considered a man or a boy? What are they? And they'll say all the things that you expect them to say. They'll say things like, fix things on your own, be strong, show emotions like angry, banter, or happy, but don't show any other emotions or any vulnerability. They explain essentially the man box, this kind of restrictive idea of masculinity that they're in. And then we have a conversation about the ways in which they police each other into that. And what is the outcome if you believe you have to be only these specific things in order to be a valuable man or a valuable boy. And we create a space for them through activities and through conversation and through curiosity where they can connect the dots and recognize the actual real world impacts of that, both in society and with an individual. Like if everyone's buying into this, then what happens? So they start to connect how this really rigid idea of masculinity is actually causing them harm, but it's also causing people of other genders harm as well. And so that's prevention work because it shifts the paradigm of how boys and men think about their identity. And it allows them to be more expansive about their identity. But more importantly, it creates a social experience where they're supported for doing that by other boys that they know. So then there's all kinds of different, sectors and practices and prevention work. But ultimately, what it is on the ground work that people undertake in any setting, in a workplace, in a community, in an education setting, where we are educating, disrupting, and giving people space to push against the drivers of gendered violence. Yeah.
I don't just take sponsors for the sake of it. So when I tell you that I believe in Kione's commitment to sustainability, I really mean it. Every fabric they use is OECO-TEX certified, which is a certification that sets the benchmark for textile safety. Their swimwear is made from recyclable yarns and regenerative new materials, some of which biodegrade at a faster rate, reducing the waste in our oceans and on our land. Their packaging, recyclable, mostly biodegradable. And here's the part that really got me. To minimize the environmental impact of transportation, everything is made in Greece. Not outsourced, not shipped across the world, made close to home by skilled Greek craftspeople. For a brand so rooted in beauty of the natural world, the sea, the land, the light, it makes complete sense that protecting the world is woven into the way that they operate. This is what I want to see more of. Not just beautiful things, but beautiful things made responsibly. So I'm honoured to have Kione as the partner for this whole season, and there is also a very special discount exclusively for you, my dear listener. Just put the slowdown, one word, at checkout for 20% off your first order at kione.com. See, this is really important work, beautiful work that is close contact, intimate. You're in the room with people, you're educating, you're sharing. And I suppose what I find fascinating in our system is that that's not glamorous work. Like that's not going to get you 1 million followers on Instagram, but doing the work that you did where it's like this big kind of glossy, we're going to pass this law, going to awards, as you said, and being this like talked about person and being in the media and being asked to do all these things and being in the, Time 100 next list and so on. Does that frustrate you?
It frustrates me no end that this big, shiny version of the work is recognized and that the intimate, important human grassroots work is not recognized. There's many reasons why that's the case. One is that like capitalism will capitalize. It's a neat story. It's an individual human story, the law change. It's the girl who was assaulted and then she fought the system.
David and Goliath.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And you can put me in a pink suit with my fist in the air and say smash the patriarchy and put me in a magazine. You can't capture or measure what happens in a room when we have to have when we're having like difficult, messy, clunky discussions with teenage boys over 3.5 hours in a classroom of a school with not much funding. There's no beautiful outfit. There's also, you can't actually watch it because we have to protect the kids, and we have to actually create intimacy and safety for people to do that where they're not seen or they're not perceived. And we know that, there's going to be no punishment for their honesty or the things that they say, which are a lot of the time, really difficult to hear because they don't say the right thing. They don't articulate themselves well. They say the bullshit stuff that you don't want to hear or that frustrates you. That's part of the work. And so the human grassroots work will never be the big shiny thing because it's directly in opposition to the status quo, and it's not sellable and it's not commercial, and it frustrates the hell out of me, but I really don't want it to be because it's incredibly, and I don't use this word tritely, like it's sacred stuff, like it's important human stuff, and you can't capture that in a Instagram post or in a op-ed or in a whatever. Like, you just can't. It makes me infuriated that people who do this work on the ground are struggling to pay their rent. But if you do, a big shiny campaign like I did, which, I'm not disparaging it, but I think the commercial opportunities that came off the back of it was like a real moment where I went, oh, hang on, okay. Right, okay, this is like a moment, there's like a real commodification of this thing, and I don't feel comfortable with that necessarily, and it's not why I got into it. And I did step back from social media, like when I started facilitating. That was because the unsafety that came from the public platform I had, like it was just like getting worse and worse. Like the threats and the police cases they just got worse and worse up until 2023. And then there was something that happened in 2023 that was really messed up, and I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I couldn't leave the house. Like I couldn't function because I was so scared of what one of these men would do. And so I thought, like, hang on, this isn't like worth it. I can't live like this. If it means I can't have social media and I don't have as many followers and I don't get any commercial jobs, like I don't care. And I kind of removed myself from that world a little bit, which was the best thing I ever did because I got to go into rooms every day with young people and work with people who actually do this shit every day and live for it. And they don't get awards and they don't get to be able to magazine, but they shouldn't, because that's not what it's about. And it wasn't really about that for me, but it became about that for me for like a year for some reason. So I'm much happier in this work. I'm much poorer. It frustrates me so much, the lack of funding. I can't express to you. It's so, the work that people do, that they have, the way that they have to regulate themselves, the way that they have to show up, the emotional risks they have to take, the things they have to deal with in prevention work. It's like, and a lot of people are coming from prevention work because they've had experiences of gendered family violence or sexual violence. They are survivors, a lot of people that work in this work. It makes me really angry that it's not funded better and that they're not taken care of more.
How do you find the balance now between posting on social, being on these platforms, there are also many positives to having a voice and being able to share and speaking to people with the community work that you do? And how are you able to, on this platform, provide like some more nuance?
I feel like I'm going to kind of come back online, and I'm doing that in a way that is for the work that I do rather than for me. Because I think for a little while after the law change, it felt like a bit of like a cult of personality type energy. And it was kind of it all kind of became about me. And like, obviously the whole point of the law change was like for other people. So I kind of wanted to decenter myself a little bit, which is why I changed the work. And obviously my politics changed and I went into prevention, and it was about being one in a room rather than everything being about me, which is very uncomfortable. So now I'm kind of interested in how can I create content, long form content, and more like remote facilitation, actually. Like, how can I do my job with experts that I know and organizations I know online, and people can access that work, that prevention work. And then I can just use my socials as a shop window so people can find that work rather than posting to keep my reputation up or posting to keep myself, in the scene. I'm hoping to bring a bit more like political and practitioner rigor to my online platforms and see how that goes. Just lessen the distance between offline and online for me.
One of the things that we talk about on this podcast is burnout. And I think obviously you've been through so much, and with the incident that happened 3 years ago, is there any particular time that you felt the most burnt out from work, and what did that actually look like?
I actually went to my doctor here, who I love. Shout out Dr. Balvinder. He's so great. He's the most calming. I live in Australia, and you have to pay for healthcare here. It's a privatized system, which is not great. But because of that system, and because I was able to pay for my appointment, you get a lot longer. And I sat with him. I kind of went to the doctors and was like, I'm losing my mind. And this was before I knew I had PTSD, but something had really changed. I was just struggling to function. I was very unwell mentally at the time. And he asked me about my sleep and my routine and the symptoms. And we sat there for like 30 minutes. And he said to me at the end, I'm really concerned that you're approaching burnout. And I mean, he was like, people throw that word around a lot, but I mean, clinically, I'm concerned about, because I was having night terrors and I couldn't sleep, and I was forgetting to eat, and I wasn't showering for days, and I couldn't regulate my emotions at all. And I don't mean like be super calm and chill. I mean like I was panicked. My arms would be shaking. I would be sweating, like dripping with sweat 1 minute. I would be crying uncontrollably. I would forget everything I was met. It was really like couldn't function. And he said those words, and I remember being like, I don't know what that is, but I've heard it thrown around a lot. But I'm unable to. I'm the closest I've ever been to being unable to function. And of course, in my work, I was working part-time at an organization in the schools at the time, and I was just finding that I'd be like crying on the way to the workshops, and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get in front of this room and do it. And every time I would, because I'm so passionate about it, and I loved working with the kids so much. But it took a diagnosis of PTSD, and I also knew that I was neurodivergent, and I'd learned a lot about my brain and what I need, like what my brain needs. And because my therapist asked me to make a timeline in a session once, and she said, go back to 2012 and can you draw lines of when you've been experiencing either an experience that made you feel significantly unsafe, a police case, or a traumatic event. And so I drew out these lines. And because I'd had this stalking case for 7 years, and then there'd been a few traumatic things in my life, and then I'd had the assault, and then didn't be doing the campaign, and then I'd had all the rape and death threats, and then I'd had a bit of a small gap, and then they'd increased to the point of having multiple police cases. Like the whole period was just had lines all over it. And she was like, you've been
been in survival mode.
Yeah, just been raw dogging this whole experience on nothing. I haven't implemented any systems or self-care or collective care when I've been going through something that actually my system is struggling to handle, and I've been doing it for years. And once the diagnosis came and Dr. Balvinder said about burnout, I went home, went to my therapist, and was like, I have to change the way I live. I can't live like this anymore. And that took me a year and a half of trying, creating one new habit and then trying to do it and then adding another one and then failing and then being nice to myself about failing and doing everything possible. And it's being really honest with the people around me that I was struggling, which I wasn't doing. I didn't tell anyone really. And I'm such an advocate of that. But I think when you're not well, you're so internal in your own head, you almost forget, you almost can't, I almost didn't have an external experience. I was just trapped in my head all the time. And I couldn't articulate to myself what was happening, which made it really hard to articulate to other people what was happening. So I think by leaning on people around me really well, by changing my job and my life, that's why I came off social media a lot. That's why I went into, continued with prevention work and didn't do anything commercial and took a lot of work away from myself. And then changing my routine and then being really honest about being not well, I was able to get better. But yeah, it would have been 2023 after the really bad threats and then being diagnosed with PTSD, where I just kind of was like, oh, I'm broken. I've just been pushing through this for years, and this is all now. The effects of that is all happening at the same time.
And are there now, and I'm hoping you're obviously in a better place, and that these tools are working for you, and that you've found a better balance with the work that you do. Are there like 3 sort of tips that you have on like slowing down in your day-to-day? Those felt like big kind of macro decisions that you needed to make, real life shifts and changes, as you said. But are there things now when you feel your anxiety bubbling or like something is happening, that you have some tools that you could share with others of things that have helped you to kind of slow down in a moment?
Yes, and they're all the boring things that work. And it's so frustrating, but they literally, like, it took me years to be like, do the things that like I knew I had to do.
They're so obvious. And then,
oh my God, they're so simple, but they're so hard to do. And they're so hard to stay consistent at. One of the biggest things that has helped me the most has created an environment for me to get better and to be a calmer, less reactive, more regulated, more like slower person, is getting off my fucking phone. Like, I now spend half the week offline. I delete all the apps on a Friday and I don't download them until the Monday. And I cannot express to you how, when I'm not cycling through, I mean, we talk about the dopamine, like the faux dopamine hit and like what that does, and it's all true, but like also my feed is all important issues. And
100%. Yeah, your feed is specifically more triggering than probably other people's.
Yeah, and like I'm like, oh, I need to keep eyes on everything that's happening, and but what that meant was I was in squirrel holes for 3.5 hours of like essentially secondary trauma, like all the time. And I can be engaged and aware of what's happening, and I can take actions without doing that for 3 hours into inertia, which actually made me less likely to be able to take actions that would help people.
And it doesn't need to be immediate. And I wonder, when things happen in the world, do you get loads of DMs from people like, why aren't you saying something about this?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm constantly getting messages asking me to do things or say certain things or whatever. And so there's only so long you can be annoyed about something until you have to recognize that you actually have autonomy in dealing with it and start to take an action based on the autonomy you have. And I think it was a very comfortable place for me for a long time when I was in my late 20s to believe I didn't have the autonomy to create boundaries with those types of things, and I absolutely do. And it was through a lot of therapy and a lot of failing and messing up at it that I got better. So having a really strong boundary with social media on my phone is really critical for me. Sleep and the same time every night and the same time waking up every morning is really important for me. I'm a 10.5-hour girly now, and I just have to get 10 hours sleep. And if I don't, I'm like, sorry, I'm just going to be probably, my mental health will start to get a bit worse after like 3 days of that, as well if I'm working really hard, as well if I'm not, seeing my friends and doing things that bring me joy and having rest moments. Like, I'm probably not going to be okay if I'm not sleeping and I'm on my phone. And then the other one is being able to be really clear and honest about what my actual capacity is, not my capability. Like, I can do any job I'm offered. I can do all those workshops. I would love to drive 3.5 hours to the Outback and work with that school. I would really like to go on that night out and then also make sure I've cleaned the whole house and then do the book club and then whatever. Like, I want to do all those things, but I actually just don't have the capacity. And for a long time, I thought that being relentlessly productive was the most important thing, because the issues that I work in are never going away and they're generational work. So I need to make as much as a dint as I can. So that means all I do is this all the time. I've actually found a lot of solace in recognizing that I'm part of a collective of people. Even if I'm in my room right now on my own, there are all kinds of people working on these issues all the time in different ways. And so when I take a rest and I get off my phone for a couple of days, there's hundreds of people that are still doing that. And when they rest, I'm working. And we don't have to be together to know that that's the case. So the collectivity of that and being really clear about my capacity so I can do an amazing job when I go into that workshop with those young people, because I've slept and I'm resourced, and I've been reading slowly and reflecting on, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, when they say that, oh, I wonder how I could, like, I'm really good at my practice if I'm slow. I'm not good at my practice if I'm overworked. So the capacity thing too, for sure.
Wow, yeah, just because you can do something does not mean you need to do something. Is a lesson that even I, like, and I don't work in activism, and I think anyone who works in any kind of, difficult work or runs their own business has that sense of like, gosh, I should be doing so much, but actually, who says?
Well, we are like, I also think it's like totally understandable, right? Like we're entirely conditioned by the systems we're under and the precariousness of the economic environment we're in to constantly feel like we have to. But if we're going to survive that stuff, we also have to take care of ourselves and each other for sure.
And so that leads me to the question of, what does success look like to you now?
I honestly think success looks like being able to do this work for my whole life in a way that has real impact collectively on people, and in a way that doesn't make me sick and allows me to make enough money to like pay my rent and like go out for a nice dinner with my partner and like have a relatively comfortable life, make an impact, and do this work for a long time without having to quit because I've overdone it.
And can you see a sort of road ahead in which that's possible?
Being able to do this work for a long time and not get sick, I think is possible now because I've learned so much from my recovery, and I'm really passionate about doing that. I think the financial side of it, if I wanted to go into an organization, I could probably, have an okay salary and have a pretty comfortable life. I'm much more interested in the creativity of doing lots of attacking the problem from lots of different angles, which is why I do commercial work and I write books, and then I also do prevention work in the room. And so financially, it's quite precarious for that reason. But I think I can be creative about making a life for myself and I don't need a lot of money to have a good life. And I think I can do that and do the work in a creative way, in a way that fulfills me as well. I do think that's possible. I just think I have to be really smart about it.
The final question that I ask everybody, just because I think it provides illuminating answers, is if I had to watch one film or read one book or have one kind of cultural experience that would help me understand you better, what would it be and why? Your questions are the best ones that I've had for a long time. You should be really stoked about having your questions.
There's too many. I rely so heavily on books and creatives and creative, like poets and TV and documentary and all those kinds of things to make me feel like things are possible. If you watched The Feminist on Cell Block Y on YouTube, you would understand me. Yeah. That's like the one thing that is the most recommended thing I ask people to watch. It shows you great facilitation. It shows you great prevention work. And it's one of my favorite things I've ever seen. And the follow-up to that the same guys made on Netflix is Songs from the Hole. So those two, Feminist on Cell Block Y and Songs from the Hole.
Thank you so much. And just to go back, when you read A Hymn to Life, Giselle Pellico's book, I believe she sent you a kind of early manuscript to read. Mm-hmm. And you came to that section about him being caught upskirting in a supermarket, and that really being one of the first things he was arrested for, because obviously she didn't tell anybody about what was happening to her. And given your kind of evolving feeling about how did you feel reading that book and coming to that passage?
I read it on a plane, and when I got to that section, I had what people sometimes talk about that I'm like, that's not real. Where I had like a full experience of being like emotional release. Like I just started crying and I was like, oh, that work has helped people. Like, I felt proud. I've spent so long with such a complex relationship to that campaign being criminalization, as someone who is so dedicated to prevention and has more kind of abolitionist tendencies. I spent so much time feeling uncomfortable about me at that period. And there was a moment where I was like, oh, hang on, that is important. Even though the work doesn't match my politics, that is important. And it has, it's not just him, it's the 51 other men or 52 other men that were caught. And so she specifically said that she doesn't know if she'd be here. And I think it wasn't even about the prosecutions. It was about her saying she doesn't know if she would be here if he hadn't been caught. Like, she thought, she believes that he would have killed her. And I think that was a really big, it made me incredibly emotional. I don't know, I can't even really articulate it, but yeah, it's the only time I've ever been incredibly emotional about that campaign in a way that was positive.
I mean, it makes me emotional. And I think a lot of people, this is the thing of like the both sides and the yes and the two things can be true at one time, which is the nuance that I'm interested in, that laws do change people's lives and they're important. You might not even know each other, but this thing that you did affected her, and then what she has now gone on to do is so important, as well as continuing with grassroots, continuing with prevention I think both of those things are really important. And, I just wanted to leave any space for if there's anything else you wanted to share on the topic of this podcast, which is really slowing down, being a radical act in a growth at all costs capitalist culture.
I think I just feel really strongly at the moment, as we slide into the complete prevalence of AI and misinformation, and the way that these platforms that we're on, that we're probably speaking to people on right now, are going to become such a tool, even more of a political tool than they have been. And there is so much magic in taking space away from them and having the space to think and explore what you really feel and what you really think, and doing that in an exchange of ideas with other people offline. It is so important, and it's going to become even more important than it ever has been for us to get offline and do this work with each other in rooms, looking into the whites of people's eyes. And I really hope that people choose to slow down in that way, in their advocacy and in their education and in their growth. Like, I really, really hope, because nothing replaces that.
Thank you so much, Gina.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. This episode was hosted and created by me, Tiana Tambridge, produced by Lulu Goad, sound and video production and recorded at Brazen Studios, cover art design by Natalia Ruhe. This season was sponsored by Kione. Please subscribe to The Slowdown to be notified of upcoming episodes, tell a friend, and please leave a review. It really does help a new podcast like this get out there in the world. And remember, we're all heading to the same destination, and there is no prize for getting there early, so we might as well slow down.